we have come to, in Father Anglès' study, the extraordinary jurisdiction in danger of death. So I remind you, there are what we have seen, the different types of jurisdiction. I think that's perhaps the most, the greatest ignorance of people is they don't know, and priests who have studied, and even bishops, forget that there are different types of jurisdiction. The ordinary jurisdiction we have seen, and that's usually what people remember, the one ex officio, the one by the office, the one then delegated to those who are assisting those in office, for example, the curate in a parish or the auxiliary bishop in a diocese. That's the ordinary, but canon law, both the old and the new, canon law foresees for difficult or extraordinary situations. And that is what we are looking at right now. We have seen the different types, the common error, the positive and probable doubt. And now we're looking at jurisdiction in danger of death, 4.1.2 in Father Anglès' study. He gives the canons of canon law in this circumstance of danger of death. The Old Code, Canon 882. In danger of death, all priests, although not approved for confessions, can validly and licitly absolve any penitent from any sins and censures, though reserved and notorious, even if an approved priest is present. And the new code, Canon 976, says the same thing. Even though he lacks the faculty to hear confessions, any priest validly and licitly absolves from any kind of censures and sins any penitent who is in danger of death, even if an approved priest is present. So the new code adds the faculty of, or explicitly, the question of administering confirmation in danger of death. The pastor or any priest can do it. 4.2. We have to understand the general principle. The Church wants to save souls. So the sacraments are there to help us get to heaven. We say, sacramenta propter homines. Sacraments are for men, to help men live and die in the grace of God. And that's why when there's an extreme necessity, such as a danger of death, the priest will close her eyes on the church will close her eyes on the condition of the priest, even if he has completely lapsed the faith, he got married, divorced, he got excommunicated, whatever. The church says, listen, you've been ordained a priest to save souls. I know you are in an irregular situation. Nevertheless, once a priest, always a priest. This person is dying. You have the power of holy orders. Exceptionally, I allow you to give him the sacraments. That's what it means. Validly and licitly. The canon law is very clear on that. The cause of this danger of death can be intrinsical, in other words, inside the person, can be illness, old age, or extrinsic, war, grave surgery, or the imminent danger of a disaster. You're on a ship that is about to sink. So that's the cause of this danger of death. And this is not just for confessions. The new code specifies also sacrament of confirmation can be given by any priest in danger of death. And both legislations, so the old code and the new code, permit the extraordinary form of marriage in case of danger of death. We will see that in the next article. I think that is easy to understand. The question of the danger of death. And it happens. People are in hospital, they're dying, they've been living in adultery for years, They want to regularize their union for the sake of the children and for the sake of dying in a state of grace as well. So that I think is pretty clear. But the point here is we have to remember that exists. There's an extraordinary circumstance, danger of death, and the church will go over all the censures that the priest may have received and say, listen, Father, you're a priest, give that soul the sacraments. Sacraments are for men. We come to section 5, the extraordinary form for marriage. Before reading Father Anglès' study, I would like, something has happened this last year in April 2017 with a letter of Cardinal Muller. Letter of Cardinal Muller, which is clearly at the request of the Holy Father. And I read you the passage because it is very important. There's many aspects to this letter. I'll just read a few passages. The Holy Father, following a proposal by the Congregation of the Doctrine for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Pontifical Commission Ecclesiae, has decided to authorize local ordinaries the possibility to grant faculties for the celebration of marriages of faithful who follow the pastoral activity of the society, according to the following provisions. So, the general idea is that the Pope allows bishops, and even more, decided to authorize. So it's, and we know from the different contacts we have in Rome and elsewhere, that the Pope really would like to make sure that the young couples getting married in the society chapels are validly married, and that they cannot claim invalidity for lack of canonical form. I continued reading. Insofar as possible, says Cardinal Muller, the local ordinary, that means the local bishop, is to grant the delegation to assist at the marriage to a priest of the diocese, or in any event to a fully regular priest, such that the priest may receive the consent of the parties during the marriage rite followed, in keeping with the liturgy of the Vetus Ordo, by the celebration of Mass, which may be celebrated by a priest of the society. So here it would be a priest of the diocese who would receive the consent, but the society priest will be celebrating Mass. It's the first mention that in Vatican documents that it's perfectly lawful for a priest of the society to say the Mass. First mention in a document like this since I think the 70s, 75, 76. Where the above is not possible, so when it's not possible to get a priest for the diocese, or if there are no priests in the diocese able to receive the consent of the parties, the ordinary may grant the necessary faculties to the priest of the society, who is also to celebrate the Holy Mass, reminding him of the duty to forward the relevant documents to the diocesan curia as soon as possible. So, this is very interesting. We will speak later on, either this talk or the next talk, about the famous suspense ad divinis. But here, the Holy Father is granting the bishops to grant the necessary faculties to society priests, not only to receive the consent, but also to say the Mass. So twice it's mentioned that it is the society priest who says the Mass. So perfectly, normally. Since that letter, which is April 5, 2017, what has happened? Well, quite a number of cardinal, archbishops, bishops around the world have given faculties to the society priests to receive the consent at the occasion of marriages. There is one in France, south of France, Monseigneur Rey of the Diocese of Toulon, who says any society priest who perform marriages in my diocese have the faculties to do so. There's a bishop in Argentina, at the Diocese of Rosario, where he says this priest, he mentioned the name of the priest in the document, is allowed to perform marriages in my diocese. And there's a cardinal in Germany, there's other bishops around the world. And here in Canada, I can say that we have three members of the hierarchy who have given us the faculty to receive the consent of marriages. The Archbishop of Ottawa, Monsignor Prendergast, who has given it to me personally. The Archbishop of Vancouver, Archbishop Miller, for a wedding which took place last January 6th. And the most recent document is just a few days ago. Cardinal Collins from Toronto has given the society also the faculties to perform marriages in the Archdiocese of Toronto. I have the document. So in these particular cases, we have ordinary jurisdiction. It's a case of delegated jurisdiction by the local ordinary. That falls into the second category. Remember, there's ordinaries divided into two. You have those out of office, ex officio, and those who are delegated normally. And well, we fall into that category. So one cannot claim then automatically all the society marriages are invalid because we lack ordinary jurisdiction. Well, that's not true, because now more and more bishops are granting this ordinary jurisdiction. Nevertheless, in some places, the bishops do not give it, and either refuse bluntly or delay. Nevertheless, we're having marriages regularly in our chapels, and therefore we continue to claim for these marriages what we call the extraordinary form for marriage, which Father Angles speaks of in section 5. Important canons. In the Old Code is Canon 1098, in the New Code 1116. 1098. If the pastor or the local ordinary or a priest delegated by either, who should, according to Canon 1095 and 1096, assist at marriage, if they cannot be had, we cannot find these priests, or the parties cannot go to him without great inconvenience. Paragraph 1. In danger of death, marriage will be validly and licitly contracted in the presence of only two witnesses. And paragraph 2. If there is at hand another priest who can be present, he should be called and he should assist at the marriage together with the witnesses. In the New Code, it's pretty much the same. If the presence of or access to a person who is competent to assist at marriage in accord with the norm of law is impossible without serious inconvenience, persons intending to enter a true marriage can validly and licitly contract it before witnesses alone, in danger of death and outside the danger of death, if the circumstances will last for 1 month. So, let's clarify a few things. The normal, what we call the canonical form of marriage, two Catholics, or a Catholic if he marries a non-Catholic, nevertheless, two Catholics must be married before an authorized priest and two witnesses. The question here is, what happens if there's no priest available? And it can happen even today. I've seen it in when I was in Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands. I visited a small Catholic village, and they said, Father, since our priest died 2 years ago, and now there's a new priest, he has not visited the village for 2 years. And so, well, we have had marriages since, but the priest doesn't come. So these things can happen, either in danger of death or if there's no danger of death. So there's circumstances where there's no priest. So does that mean that people just cannot get married? They will be living in sin all the time? The answer is no. Remember, the key thing here is it's the couple who is the minister of the sacrament. It's not the priest. The priest is only the official witness of the church. And that is why in section 2 it is said, if the grave inconvenience, if the problem, it's a war, it's a remote area, or priests just don't visit like this place in the Pacific, then the couple can get married without a priest as long as you have the witnesses. And that is approved in both codes, because there are Catholics all over the world, but priests do die, like everybody else. And sometimes there's persecution, sometimes there's circumstances which make it impossible to get a priest. However, if there can be a priest, any priest who can come to the wedding, to witness the wedding, he must come. He must come. But his presence will not render the form, the canonical form. As we said, the couples can get married without the priest, but he must be present. He must be present to represent the church, because the witness of a priest is very important for the church. The authors and the decisions of the Roman Rota, so the Roman tribunal, clearly state that not only a physical impossibility to get a priest, but also a moral inconvenience of a spiritual nature for the parties to have recourse to an authorized priest is sufficient to invoke the exception from ordinary canonical form, as long as the other conditions also exist, either the danger of death or this grave circumstance which will last for a month. That is capital to understand that. So, this grave inconvenience, gravi incommodo, say both code. And what is this grave inconvenience? Father gives a number of texts, but I come to 5.4 in his study, applying this canon to our case. So the church says, and the law, the authors, and the practice of the church explains what is this grave inconvenience. It can be on the part of the couple. It can be of a moral nature, maybe a significant moral harm for the parties. So let us explain. The ordinary canonical form of marriage, so a priest and 2 witnesses, does not apply when full observance of the law requesting the presence of an authorized priest would involve a danger for the soul. And secondly, at least one of the parties is in danger of death, or there's a prudent assessment that the state of affairs contemplated in that first case, when there's a danger for the soul, will continue for at least 1 month. Father Anglès explains, we're talking about a danger for the soul of the couple. So if you want to get married, there's obviously the preparation for the marriage. And for the last 50 years, after Vatican II, which, and especially since 1983, also the teaching of Vatican II having been incorporated in the new Code of Canon Law, a lot of the courses for the preparation of marriage actually change or are a danger for the faith. And the clearest example is that the Council and the new Code have inverted the ends of marriage. What does that mean? Traditionally, marriage is for, number 1, the procreation and the education of children, and number 2, then the mutual support of the husbands and the husband and wife. Now, in the new code and in the new catechism of the Catholic Church, it is said here, the new code, canon 1055, paragraph 1, the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole life is by its nature ordered towards what? 1, the good of the spouses, and 2, the procreation and education of the offspring. The order of ends is essential. At Vatican II, there were tremendous debate about this. Cardinal Brown stood up. Cardinal Brown was a Dominican, the head of the Dominicans, stood up to say and said, "Caveatis, fathers, watch out, fathers, don't touch the ends of marriage. Because if you touch that, the consequence will be terrible. Because if the first goal of marriage is the good of the spouses, well, their happiness, in other words, if it makes them happy not to have children, then they're allowed to not to have children. It opens the door to contraception, like Pope Francis right now is doing with the last few days by changing Humanae Vitae. And it allows the door to anything, operations, whatever. So if, imagine your children wanting to get married, and the priest is telling them, well, the first goal is to be happy in marriage, children are secondary. And it's going to open the door to what I have said. Well, you can, and they will believe the priest more than you. Because they say, well, Mom, he's the priest. He knows the law. He knows the teaching of the church. He's telling us it's okay. So you cannot expose your children to receive the wrong teaching about marriage. I have one mother who told me, it was in Ireland, of all places, many years ago, it's back in the 80s, 87, 88. She says, Father, I think it was her niece getting married, the priest put on the table all the different types of contraceptives. This is how you do it. So, and then try to change the mind of your son or your daughter afterwards when they are told by the priest this is okay. So that's why there's a grave inconvenience to let our young men, young ladies receive such a teaching, which is contrary to the faith. So that's the teaching. And now with Amoris Laetitia, it gets even worse. Okay? It opens the door justifying all the errors, divorce, contraception, sexual misbehavior, and so on. That's the training. That's the course. That's the whole doctrine of marriage, which is a grave inconvenience. But there's also the question of the Mass. The Mass, the couple has a right to have the traditional Mass, and in many circumstances, the priest and the bishop will refuse the couple the traditional Mass. They will impose the Novus Ordo Mass. I had a case in Ireland, and they wanted to have, of course, traditional marriage and a traditional Mass. The local Archbishop of Dublin said, okay, you can have either the traditional marriage with the new Mass or a new type of marriage with the traditional Mass, but you cannot have both. And he wrote to Rome, and Rome said, talk to your bishop. Well, that's what the bishop was saying. So, we cannot expose our young people to a Mass which puts the faith in danger. It is not I who says so. Cardinal Bacci and Ottaviani, they said about the new Mass. The new Mass represents both as a whole and in its details a striking departure from the Catholic theology of the Mass as it was formulated in session 22 of the Council of Trent. So there is tremendous crisis of faith in the Church on the question of marriage, and therefore the young couple have the right to receive a training, a preparation, which is fully Catholic, and to have a ceremony which is fully Catholic. Therefore, there's a grave inconvenience to go to the local priest who applies the principles of Vatican II, either through the new Code of Canon Law or the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the new Catechism. And therefore, the marriages of the society are perfectly valid and licit according to these canons. Not just in danger of death, as we have said, but outside the danger of death as well, provided the circumstance will last for at least a month. Well, we know it's been going on for 50 years. So they may exchange vows before two ordinary witnesses, and such matrimony will be perfectly valid. And if a priest can be there, he must come without adding, I would say, to the validity and the licity. So the marriage is perfectly valid and licit with or without the priest. That's what the church law says. And if, after explaining all these things, you still have a doubt, well, and then we have the question of positive and probable doubt. And the church will supply jurisdiction, as we have said in a previous part of the conference, according to Canon 209 of the Old Code, or Canon 144 of the New Code. So we'll stop here for this section. We'll continue at another moment with the conference of Father Angles.